इल्म जनता का है बीच जनता के है इन्हें आजाद रखने का वादा करे देश खाने को है गीत मंडरा रहे सारे गीतों से बचने का वादा करे बिन बोले आजादी न बच पाएगी भारत आजाद रखने का वादा करे बिन बोले आजादी न बच पाएगी भारत आजाद रखने का वादा करे इल्म जनता का है बीज जनता के है इन्हें आजाद रखने का वादा करे
As the last barriers to free trade in agriculture break down, farmers of the world are increasingly demonstrating their anger at the free market regime that is being forced upon them through the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT. GATT is a multilateral trade regulating mechanism set up shortly after the Second World War. GATT has undergone many changes through the various rounds of negotiations, which have increased the areas covered by it. The present round, the Uruguay round of negotiations, which started in the mid-80s, attempts to expand its scope to cover, among other things, agriculture and trade-related intellectual property rights. These inclusions have caused consternation among farmers all over the world. Why are farmers rejecting GATT? The GATT proposals on agriculture demand the opening of domestic markets for import of food. Coupled with the structural adjustment conditionalities for increasing agricultural exports, they mean a shift away from food production and self-reliance in food. The clauses also demand the phasing out of subsidies to farmers who were forced into debt through the unsustainable policies promoting the Green Revolution with its high-cost inputs of fertilizers, pesticides and water. Subsidies will still exist, but will be directed to transnational corporations in the form of incentives for establishing their presence in India. The Agreement on Trade-Related Intellectual Property Rights, or TRIPS, is an instrument for handing over the control of biodiversity and natural resources and scientific knowledge about them to transnational corporations.
GATT is not just about trade. It is about how we govern ourselves. It is about how people produce and consume, which means about daily life. For countries like India, where 80% of our people produce and consume within the small domain, the local domain of self-provisioning, self-management, GATT can be a very, very severe threat to narrowing down the options within which they produce and consume, exactly like creating freedom for the markets of the Manchester and Lancashire textile mills necessarily meant the end of freedom of our weavers to continue to weave. The metaphor really is colonization.
It has in it a multi-pronged attack on the very agricultural infrastructure of this country. And if we allow the Dunkel regime to come into force in India, well, in about 5 years' time, at least half the agricultural population in India will be jobless, will be uprooted from their occupation through the various provisions that are there in the Dunkel draft.
The entry of transnational corporations into agriculture disrupted the social fabric of the West over the mid-20th century. Small family farms have practically disappeared in the US, UK, and large parts of Europe.
Third world countries do not have multinationals. The multinationals are restricted in the northern countries, the industrialized countries, the group of 7 countries. And these multinationals perform across the world, use raw materials across the world, find markets across the world, but they still are protected by their governments.
While trade has always been practiced in society, the GATT proposals shift the perspective of agricultural production from domestic consumption and food security to exports, thereby handing control of agriculture totally over to transnational corporations.
Food security has to be considered as equivalent to the freedom of a nation. That is the way we look at it. Any agricultural policy without any regard for the food security of the country would definitely lead to famines. We have past experience in Champaran when there was indigo culture and was no agriculture, and the famine at that time was not because of drought but because of the scarcity of food. A similar thing has happened in Russia. Russia collapsed because it neglected food security, and we do not like that to happen in India.
Engaging in international trade is a third level activity. It's a derived activity. GATT is in fact putting it at the center stage, which must necessarily put at the periphery those economic activities that must be at the center. It is putting our national economies in the periphery, which means the way we take care of our basic needs of food, clothing and shelter, will be totally marginalized, and you can get a sense right now of how this is happening. Agriculture policy has already shifted in this year from being a policy to make sure the farmer survives, the land survives, and people meet food needs. It has shifted to how does the government give subsidies to exporters of agro-processed foods.
By entering the export market, some say that Indian farmers would greatly benefit. But what are we going to export? We would be exporting only non-food crops, which means increasing the area of non-food crop agriculture, which automatically creates dependence on foreign food. And with the global market structure, dependence on food might lead us to a bigger debt trap from where we would never be able to escape. This is the danger behind export-oriented agriculture. And the talk about self-reliance in food in India is a big lie. We are not yet self-reliant. We are talking about self-reliance by keeping half the population half-starved. First, we have to achieve self-reliance and then food security, and then think of export-oriented agriculture.
Agriculture cannot merely be a market. Agriculture is a lifestyle, it's a commitment, it's a culture. It's basically a relationship with the earth. But the issue is, what is more important to us? Our basic, inviolable freedom, or our servitude to the economic powers of the world?
The Indian farmer's choice was never in doubt. On October 2nd, 1992, the historic city of Hospet in Karnataka was the scene of a mammoth farmers' rally, which took a pledge to protect India's honor and independence and launch the Seed Satyagraha. There is no guarantee that the Constitution of India will stay unchanged if the GATT agreement is signed. The Constitution upholds the right to live. The trade-related intellectual properties agreement of GATT reduces life to a patentable profit-generating resource for transnational corporations.
when Columbus went out to colonize America, he was given a patent by the Queen of Spain. The piece of paper that was given to him was called a patent. And the patent said, you can go to any part of the world which is not inhabited or ruled by white Christians, and you can claim it on our behalf as our territory. You just have to replace land by living resources and living systems and life forms. And you have basically the issue of patents 500 years after Columbus.
Biological patenting is the ultimate weapon for taking away the reproductive capacity of the seed. The use of intellectual property rights for living resources is the start on the road to this end. Seeds of agricultural crops have been developed over centuries in the regions of biodiversity origin by third world farmers. The Green Revolution's emphasis on monocultures, along with the excessive use of chemicals, has resulted in the disappearance of much of this diversity. If it exists today, it does so only in the gene banks controlled by the West. Inaccessible to farmers, this diversity is available to transnational corporations freely, who patent it as their property.
Well, Cargill's statement that they are helping Indian agriculture by contributing better food crop varieties is a big bluff. Actually, all the food crops come from Africa, Asia and Latin America. Only sunflower comes from North America, which is not a food crop. And even they are stealing our knowledge, including the pollination of sunflower, hand pollination done by Indian farmers. Actually, they are stealing our knowledge and they are not helping Indian agriculture.
The TRIPS agreement reflects the racist view of science. Scientific observation, innovation, technology development, and sustainable utilization of natural resources by non-Western communities is considered the patentable property of corporations of the first world when they come to learn of it. The neem tree of India was called Azad Darakht, the free tree, by the Persians. This concept of freedom exists in the name of its active principle, Azad-i Rakhtin, for which this tree has been effectively patented by the West through the devious means of patenting all processes that result in biopesticides containing the principle.
ಬೇವಿನ ಸೊಪ್ಪನ್ನ ನೀರಿಗೆ ಹಾಕಿ ಅದರಿಂದ ಸ್ನಾನ ಮಾಡಿಸೋದು ಈ ರೀತಿ ಎಲ್ಲ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ನಾವು ಕ್ರಿಮಿನಾಶಕ ಇದು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿ ನಮ್ಮ ತಾತ ಮುತ್ತಾತಂದ್ರೆ ಕಳೆದಿದ್ರು.
ಮತ್ತು ನಾವು ಔಷಧಿ ಉಪಯೋಗಿಸಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಸಸ್ಯಗಳ ಮೇಲೆ ವಿದೇಶಿಯರು ಯಾವ ಥರ ಆಕ್ರಮಣ ಮಾಡಿ ಅದ್ರ ಮೇಲೆ ಪೇಟೆಂಟನ್ನು ಸಣ್ಣದನ್ನು ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ತಾವು ಅದರ ಮೇಲೆ ಸೌಮ್ಯವನ್ನು ಸ್ಥಾಪಿಸ್ಕೊಂಡು ಪುನಃ ನಮಗೆ ಮಾರಾಟ ಮಾಡೋ ಪ್ರಯತ್ನ ಮಾಡ್ತಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಇದಕ್ಕೆ ಅವಕಾಶ ಕೊಡೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಇವೆಲ್ಲ ನಮ್ಮ ಸೊತ್ತು, ಇದು ನಮ್ಮ ಪೂರ್ವಜರ ಸೊತ್ತು, ಇದನ್ನ ಉಳಿಸ್ಕೊಳ್ಳುವಂಥ ಹಕ್ಕು ನಮಗಿದೆ. ಈ ಹಕ್ಕನ್ನು ಯಾರು ಕಿತ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋಕೆ ಅವಕಾಶ ಕೊಡೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಹಕ್ಕು ಕಿತ್ಕೊಳ್ಳುವಂಥ ಯಾರೇ ವಿದೇಶಿ ಆಗಲಿ ಸ್ವದೇಶಿ ಏಜೆಂಟ್ರಿಗಾಗಲಿ ಭಾರತದ ರೈತ ಸಮುದಾಯವೇ ಶಿಕ್ಷೆಯನ್ನು ವಿಧಿಸುವಂಥ ಹಕ್ಕು ನಾವು ಉಳಿಸ್ಕೊಳ್ತೀವಿ, ಅದು ಮಾಡೇ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿ.
ನಮ್ಮ ಬೀಜನ ನಾವು ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೂಬಾರ್ದಂತೆ, ನಾವು ಬೆಳೆದ ಬೀಜನ ಬೇರೆಯವ್ರಿಗೆ ಮಾರಲೂಬಾರ್ದಂತೆ. ಇದು ನೂರಾರು ವರ್ಷದ ಹಕ್ಕು ಇದು ನಮಗೆ. ಇವನ್ ಕೇಳ್ಕೊಂಡು ಮಾಡುವಂಥದ್ದು ಏನಿದೋ, ಇವನ್ ಯಾರಂತ ದೊಣೆ ನಾಯಕ ನಮ್ಮನ್ನು ಕೇಳಕ್ಕೆ?
The TRIPS clauses on reversal of burden of proof penalizes farmers, particularly third world farmers, for having shared their knowledge freely with the world.
ನಮ್ಮ ಜ್ಞಾನನ ತಮ್ಮ ಜ್ಞಾನ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ಕೊಂಡು ಬರ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ ಅವರು ಕಳ್ಳರು. ಜ್ಞಾನನ ಕದಿಯುವಂತ ಕಳ್ಳರು. ನಾವು ನಮ್ಮದೇ ಬೀಜ ಹಾಕಿ ಬೆಳೆ ಬೆಳೆದಿದ್ರು ಕೂಡ ಆ ವಿದೇಶಿ ಕಂಪನಿಯವನೇನಾದ್ರೂ ಬಂದು ಈ ರೈತ ನನ್ನ ಬೀಜನ ಉಪಯೋಗಿಸಿದಾನೆ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಸಾಕು, ನಾವು ಕಳ್ಳರು. ಯಾರು ದೂರ್ ಕೊಡ್ತಾರೋ ಅವರು ಆರೋಪಿ ಅಂತ